Welcome to the Lightforge. This is ADWCTA.
This is Merps. We got a very special guest here. Three time. Wait, is it three time? I think it's three time. All right.
Maybe
This
four
is number
time.
four.
I think
Four
this is four
time.
time.
Oh my God, too many times. But we got the one and only Shadybunny here with us. Welcome, man.
What's up, guys? Good to be here.
Oh yeah. All right. We got quite a bit to talk about today. Well, we got lots of stuff to talk about, so I'm glad we have one more person to listen to ADWCTA's ramblings while I doze off in the background.
Hey,
But,
man, there's gonna be less ramblings from me today, I think, because we're going into territory that I'm less passionate about after the Mage talk.
Okay.
Fantastic. So first, I think we should just talk about the big news that came out this week. Leaderboards were out, right? Leaderboards came out, something that we talked about for a while in previous months. You know, ever since it was announced in like early mid-January. Well, January leaderboards are out, and there are some things that are not too much of a surprise, and some things that are actually pretty surprising. So first of all, big congrats to the two #1 spots in NA and EU. #1 in NA, we have the one and only Criparian, and #1 EU is less known streamer slash player, but it's 12 wins, aka Victor. Yeah, big congrats to both
AKA,
of them.
what's his actual like Twitch account? It's like
His Twitch name is Dota 2 MMR Boosting.
Oh God. I'm like, I remember this. I remember him. So what are their averages? What will take you if you are this good? What will get you #1 in NA and in EU?
Right. So I don't have the exact numbers in front of me, but Crip's average is basically 7.7, right? 7.7 gets you #1 NA. Victor's average, Shady, you can help me out with this. I think it was 9.3.
Yeah, breaking 9 for sure.
Yeah,
It was like 9.2, 9.3. Anyway, it's ridiculous. Like the difference between what we consider like. Remember when we were guessing like what the top like number would be, and I think you were like, oh, it's probably not gonna break 8 generally, and then I was like, no, it's gonna break 8 definitely, and who knows, you could get like 10, maybe like 9. And here's Victor getting more than 9 wins per run.
Oh yeah. I mean, I definitely wait. Did I actually say it wasn't going to break 8? Because I always thought it was going to break 8.
No, maybe not. Maybe I'm making this up.
Yeah, I was like,
Maybe
wait,
Adwok
that
switched to
doesn't
points.
Yeah,
sound
maybe I
like-
switched it up. Maybe I said it wasn't going to go 8. No, I thought it was going to go really high though.
No, because I'm thinking if you just like, you know, with the ability to restart the accounts over and over, and 30 is a lot of runs, but it's not, you know, astronomical amount. So I definitely think you can break 8. And because if you're a good infinite player, you know, we've all broken like 8 or 8.5 within like, you know, if you just looked at our histories, right? Like we've done that. We've also done significantly worse during some 30, you know, runs, but it's like you just want to catch that pocket of magical runs. So big congrats to them. The big surprise though is sort of the people bringing up the rear, like myself included. All right. But so what sort of is the minimum average you need to get on the leaderboard? It's about like a 6.4, 6.5, which is where I was at. For NA.
A little bit higher for EU.
I know, yeah. Remember last week when you asked us like, hey, like what's your average? I was like, oh no, it's probably like 6.2 or something. Like I just like threw my account away afterwards. I was like, it's like for the 1% chance, I didn't want to end up being like the number like 98 on the leaderboard. And that's
well, you did better than 98.
Number 90. Woohoo!
So I think this is pretty encouraging for people if you're like an infinite player or even like a soft infinite player and you're thinking of tryharding, but then you're like, oh, it's pointless to do 30 whole runs in a month and not be able to make the leaderboard even. 6.5 is a pretty low bar, right? Like all Reddit averages 7 wins per run, so it should be pretty easy to get to 6.5. So if you're a soft infinite arena player, maybe get 30 runs in February and see where it lands you.
Yeah, I want to add to that though that Blizzard didn't announce this up front, so I feel like the competition for February will be significantly higher. Like I don't think you get away with 6.5 for the leaderboard this time. I think it'll probably be more towards the 7 because people will now be actively throwing away accounts, starting over again, and they'll have 30 days to do it, or 28.
Yeah, they will have 2 more weeks to do whatever it is they do.
And not only that, but there's not too many people that remake accounts. So I think a lot of other people already, messed around a little bit before they got the notification, like, oh, okay.
Oh, right, for January.
My account is no longer pristine this month. I'll just play it out. I'll see where I get. But if people now at the start, they'll just pick Warlock Mage and nothing else if they can help it. Well, or whatever they deem to be the strongest class for them.
I mean, you look at all the streamers that are like professional streamers or whatever, and we're looking at, they're all making new accounts, and like, Crypt didn't use his normal account to do the 30 runs, right? Like, and that's what you should do, because you have the bonus from going first. From starting a new account where you get easy runs for the first 3, and you just get to do it over and over and over again, right? And if you're a streamer, you get to do it in a way that maybe you don't get sniped. So it's kind of a different meta now that you set it up, but for regular people who just have one account, and I consider myself a regular person because I didn't even make the leaderboard last month because I couldn't play enough arenas. For the record, I would have been number 12 if you counted my 20 runs as if they were 30. And this month I'm tryharding and I'm doing like way better, but I feel like a lot of people are in a lot of good arena players are in my position where they in January in the middle, like Shady said, you look at it and you're like, all right, that's too much, forget it, let's do February. And then in February I don't play all classes anymore. I just play Mage and Warlock, and every now and then I play a Rogue, and I'm like, ugh, I have to play a Rogue. That was so unlucky.
Low power level.
Like, this isn't a Warlock. What? So I think it's really exciting. It's definitely gotten people hyped up about arena generally, and it's also gotten people, a fire has been lit under a lot of people. Anyways, we should give a shout out to a few other people who made the leaderboards, including our friend and mod on our channel, Dr. Stein, who got number 3 EU. Very impressive. Huge congrats. Isherwood also made the leaderboard, right? Hafu made the leaderboard on NA. Also, Hafu and we made EU on our joint account in EU as well. I think it was like number 27. Shady, who am I missing here? Help me fill in the rest.
Honestly, I didn't really study it that well. I really just looked at
Merps cares about the leaderboard more than any of the rest of us.
Yeah, if I'm honest, I looked at 1, 2, 3, and then like at the bottom to see what made the cut. I scrolled over. I was like, hey, have fun, Merps, cool. I didn't even look at NA. I was just like, oh, Crips.
Yeah.
So yeah, sorry, I did not come prepared in that regard.
But no, I think this is an awesome opportunity, and certainly, if we're looking at this like a sport, right? And we could never say it like we could never talk like this about arena before. Now you have sort of this competition. You have hype about these like new players that no one knew about before. I'm sure everyone's like, oh, who's this number 1 EU guy with like a 9.3 average?
It's like a ridiculous. Like he beat the next guy by so much. He beat Crip by so much. It's a ridiculous like achievement. And he set the standard, right? Like now you could get number 1 in A and be like, oh, I'm better than Crip for this month. But you got to beat 9.2 or 9.3 or whatever Victor got to be like, oh, I have the number 1 of all time.
Yeah, it would be funny if this has like the 4-minute mile effect where people go like, oh, you can break 9. Cool.
Yeah.
And then suddenly, next month is like 10 people
breaks 10. I think it's possible to break 10. I think it is possible.
Yeah.
For
sure. Anything's possible.
Man, I don't know. I think, okay, look, it might be possible, but I think we need a shift in meta. I don't know if it's possible right now. Like with everyone's knowledge of the leaderboard.
That's true.
Yeah. I think we need a shift in meta so that you can have someone exploiting the meta for 10 wins. I think that's possible. But because nothing has changed so far, there's not really any, you can pick up small things here or there. For example, like Victor recently said he exploited sort of the Warlock meta last month, right? And he played some Hunters and he did very well. But that's that's a significant change. I don't think there's much to exploit right now in terms of...
Yeah, it's a pretty stable meta. All the classes are pretty even.
So we'll see. That would be really exciting. And then maybe we can have the first 10 win average leaderboard arena god slash champion on the Lightforge as well. Maybe it'll just be Shady.
It'll happen at some point. Maybe
You're
half
getting
a
10?
win,
It'll happen at some point. Shady has promised that he will average 10 wins.
If you give me a couple of years, I'll definitely break it at some point. I'll just try. It's just the law of averages, right? It'll work at some point.
It is. No, it's true.
4 months or whatever is the premium class in a row at some point.
All right. So the big question, I think the big question that anybody who is not at the top of the leaderboard really cares about is, have we settled the question, NA or EU? Which is the better server? So we got the stats here now of at least what the top players are able to do. And it looks like, one, the very top of the EU is way higher than the top of NA. Like the top 3, Dr. Stein's average is like 8.5 or something, which is still like, I don't know, almost like a whole point above Crips. And that's like number 3. So there's like a couple of people, like a handful of people who are significantly above Crips, like in a leading average in EU. And the like number 100 for EU, I think was 6.7 or something, or maybe even 6.8. And for NA, it was like 6.5. So EU numbers are higher. What does that mean?
Oh, Shady, you want to crack at this? You're from EU.
Yeah,
What's going on over there?
There's a couple ways of going about this, right? I think there's 2 very common things people will say, and they're probably wrong, right? For the first opinion will be, oh, obviously EU people are better because they have higher averages. The other one will be, mainly people from EU will say that, by the way. And then mainly people from NA will say, well, all the EU players are so bad that obviously the couple guys that can play will get the averages. I think that there's more people on EU. So I think that also plays into it. If you have more people, I think it's more likely that there's going to be a couple people with a little bit higher averages because there's more chance you meet someone who's not that great. I also think that part of it is, Victor also told me, he was only only, right? He only made the leaderboard twice, right? But on NA, it was like 40 something.
Yeah.
48, yeah, I think so.
Yeah, and that was with a couple runs, like 15 runs or so, that he was already in that account without knowing that, the leaderboard was going to be a thing.
Right.
So I think it's just a lot of factors coming together in the beginning. I think that it'll normalize a little bit more towards later editions of the leaderboard, if only because people will migrate and play on different.
I think that's what's the most interesting thing. You look at the same people and you look at their positions on NA and EU and you see which is higher, right? So whoever has like 2 accounts, and have done 30 runs on both NA and EU, you look at that and you see who's like, are they doing better in EU or better in NA? And if there's a consistent pattern in which it's one or the other, then you kind of have an answer. It's hard from the numbers to get that. For the record, Asia is like super difficult, or no one good ever plays on Asia, one or the other, because the Asian numbers are like really, really low. So if you want to make the leaderboard and you think all servers are created equal, then maybe you want to do your 30 runs on the Asia servers. I think it's only I haven't looked at it, but I think the bottom, you only need like 5 point something wins per run to make the top 100.
Yeah, it's like a 5.5 or something.
Yeah, it's like not even like 5.9. It was it's ridiculous. So if you if you like the Asian meta, or if you haven't seen it yet but you want to get on the leaderboard and you average like 5-ish wins per run, it's a pretty good opportunity, right?
Definitely. We have heard from other players. Like Shady, do you play on Asia?
I used to, and then I got wrecked so hard I vowed never to. No, I'm not kidding. But I do play on Asia, and I do. I haven't recently because I'm trying for the leaderboard, right? And I don't get that many runs in that way. But usually it's a little weird. I feel like the meta is different, and I think to perform well on Asia, you need to play a lot more there to get a good feel for what you're doing. For instance, one of my viewers told me, like, holy crap, man, if you go on Asia right now, just draft aggro. Like, I've not seen a 2-drop in Asia. It's like, he's obviously over-exaggerating, but he's like, so many people are missing their early drop. And then, a year ago or something, whenever I'd go on Asia, there'd be tons of aggro. So I feel like the meta might be a little bit more pronounced there. And then you can exploit that a little bit better. I don't know if that's true, but It does feel different most of the time when I play it.
All right, you heard it here first. Shadybunny, 10 wins per run average in Asia servers coming up.
He's promised it, guys. And Shady never backs down from a promise.
You guys are amazing. Anybody want to tell me that? You guys are, yeah. This is great. I come on your show. All right, never mind. All right.
All right, let's move on to the actual game, away from all this like ranking things that probably at least half of our listeners don't really care about. Deep fried meta. Let's do this. This is why Shady is on here, because, and this is kind of a continuation. If you remember, like 4 episodes back in the Lightforge, me and Merps had this like really heated like half-hour discussion about Warlock v Mage and how to play Mage in this meta. And Shady has a particular style that he wants to talk about for the Mage in MSG that's been working really well for him. So why don't you take it and just kind of outline how you're playing Mage these days in MSG.
Awesome. All right. So I'll quickly go over how I drafted first, and then we'll go over how I play it. The big thing that's different in this Mage, because obviously, you can reinvent a style or whatever, but some things are still going to be true, right?
Are you still taking Firelance portals really high?
Yes, of course. So it's not that revolutionary. But the main thing is that I try to stay away from mid-game. I've had a couple drafts that had 0 or maybe 1 4-drop that did really well. I had 2 12-0s in this meta with pretty much no mid-game in Mage. The reasoning for that is that by cutting down on the mid-game, I feel you can invest more heavily in early game and in value. If you have more early game, there is more chance you're going to be in control of the board, or at least not really far behind your aggro/mid-range opponent. If that happens for a control deck, it's kind of like when the Mage drops on mid-chow on turn 1, you feel like you can already scoop. It's like, man, I really needed to pressure this Mage because she was going to really outvalue me in the late game. So by cutting down on the mid game, you can draft more 1s, 2s, and 3s without the feeling that you're going to run out of gas. Because let's say we cut the mid game in half, right? You say like maybe +4 cards for early game, +4 cards for late game. You can start drafting a lot more greedy because there's less chance you're going to not curve out early. So we're going to be picking cards like Tome, Courier, Conjure, anything that gets you more cards extremely high, whereas normally you'd be, maybe that's a little bit too greedy, right? My 5th card that is just purely card draw, like Acolytes of Pain and Arcane Intellects.
Sure.
Yeah. So if I'm drafting it, the prioritization would look something like this. The first thing you're looking for is value. That's the one that's going to be important. The second thing is single target removal, which is also value something, right? Because if you get to destroy one of your opponent's threats that would have killed more than one of your cards, you're gaining value. It's just like you're gaining value by preventing your opponent from gaining value.
So when you're saying single target removal, do you value things like Frostbolt and Flame Cannons on about the same level as Fireballs and Polymorphs and Flame Lances, or do you prefer one or the other?
I should specify it. So when single target removal, I'm talking about Polymorphs and Flame Lances.
Yes, okay.
The other ones I call small removals, but yeah, obviously.
Okay, so single target removals are basically, they are value, right? They're big stuff. Like, rather than playing a Force Tag Max, you remove a Force Tag Max. You gotten the same size out of it. So, rather than playing the Mistress of Potions, the Chemist guy, what do you call him? Cabal Chemist.
Yeah.
Rather than playing Cabal Chemist, which is a 3/3, and then you get a card that has an average value of about like 4 or 5 mana or whatever, you remove something that is a total of like 7-8 mana's worth of stuff put together. So so they're all like value based. You're just getting
they're somewhat interchangeable, indeed. But just to keep it a little bit more separate for people listening, that they know the difference there. Then next up is good early game. That's also really important. That's mainly the thing you're going to be looking at. Number 3. The reason being is that not many of your picks are going to be pure value or pure single target removal offered. That's why I have them up early. But obviously, if you have no early game curve, you might want to pick that to drop over that super value card if you haven't already. Then 4th is AoE, which might be surprising. You might say, hey, you're building this control deck and you're not really prioritizing AoE. What's up? If you have a good early game curve, you don't really need AoE. Now, obviously, you'll still take a little bit because your plan doesn't always work. You don't always go 1, 2, 3, and sometimes your opponent has a great tempo play, and that flame strike still hits hard.
Like the AOE's are just really good cards in Mage.
Yeah,
so,
like
they're
you
just
won't,
powerful
hate
cards.
having a flame collar, of course.
Yeah.
But the thing is that those AOE's do handicap you quite a bit in the value mirrors, and those are really where the challenges lie with this style, because you'll find that any aggro or mid-range deck you'll probably just beat, because you have this good early game. You'll have single target removal for their bigger threats, so it's just a really clean game. The challenge comes later versus value decks, which is why I've scaled down on the AoE. When I started playing it, I was still pretty big on AoE, and then I just scaled it down because it seemed to just be in my hand and not be very useful. And then at the very bottom we have the mid game, which you'll still pick sometimes, right? I'll still pick a Shredder sometimes, I'll still pick a Water Rally sometimes, but I'll skip them much more often than I would before.
Okay, so when you say the AoEs that you're prioritizing low, obviously you're still taking your Flame Strike. So what are you not taking? Like, are we talking like Arcane Explosions, Volcanic Potions? Like,
okay, so it totally depends on how good your curve is.
If no, assuming you have a good curve.
Assuming you have a good curve, I will not prioritize any AoE. I will pick an Arcane Intellect over a Flame Strike if I need to.
Oh, okay,
because,
okay. Yeah, okay. So I want to point out this is like a very extreme way compared to how most people try. Most people take a Flame Strike regardless, right? Like, you can have your curve, you can do whatever. It's a Flame Strike, you take it. So you would actually take another, like, generally, like, overall value, what's Arcane Intellect? Average? Like, average's card? Maybe
I think
slightly
Arcane
above
Intellect is
average?
very strong. It's one of the best cards in the style.
Okay.
Because you're drafting premium cards, premium value, right? So it helps
Right.
you get through your deck faster. And it basically gives you more chance to get to those other good value cards and gets the early game out of the way faster. So that's
Right.
why I really like cards that draw from your own deck.
Okay, yeah. So in like a normal mage, like not necessarily the style. Like if you're just first pick, you don't care which style you're going down. Arcane Intellect is average to above average, maybe. And in this style, Arcane Intellect will be high, and it will be like a very good card. But more importantly, Flame Strike is so low compared to where normal people think Flame Strike would be in a normal mage deck that it would actually go like quite pointedly below a Arcane Intellect.
Yeah, I mean, it's more that Arcane Intellect is that great, because Flame Strike is essentially not a terrible value card. I mean, even in the value mirrors, you use it in the late game, go 1 for 1 or maybe 1 for 2. It's fine. It's just that Arcane Intellect gives you that guaranteed value swing. But at the very start of a draft, I'm not going to tell anyone to pick an Arcane Intellect over a Flame Strike, to pick the Flame Strike, because you're not guaranteed you're going to get something like this. And Flame Strike is never, a terrible card to have. But if my deck is looking fairly defined, let's say we're talking pick 21, I have good early curve, I need some value, I will not be sad to skip a Flame Strike to grab a Conjure or an Arcane Intellect or something along those lines.
I think that's pretty interesting. Yeah. Like when you said at the beginning, it's like, oh, small changes here or there. This is like really big stuff.
Yeah. By the end of the draft, this is like a totally different way of drafting.
Yep.
Yeah. And I think we talked about this. Did we talk about this sort of like last time as well? Sort of, or maybe we just chatted about it. How it's like mid-range. Oh no, we talked about it with Ratsma, and he was pointing out. He's like, like mid-range for certain classes just like doesn't work, right? And he's like, it's like the early aggressive cards. Like first of all, they're always a little bit overstated for their cost, right? You look at
because they take a card, so they got to get something out of it.
Right. So that's always good for protecting you, and you get like more than what you should get for that mana.
Yeah,
for the
you get a little
game.
extra tempo.
Right. And late game cards always have more value than what you're supposed to have. Yetis don't give you anything extra, right?
Yep.
4/5s and 5/4s for 4 mana don't give you anything extra. Yep. They just exist for you to keep the game going. So if you are sort of like going away from that, you're going to get extra stats in the early game, and you're going to get extra value in the late game, and then your deck overall just becomes better, right?
You just get more stuff, basically.
Yeah.
More cards if you cut the mid game.
Like what we're talking about, mid-range this is the meta in which like mid-range has been slowly losing power from like absolute dominance in Classic to just slowly losing power over the times. But like MSG really destroyed mid-range between all the additional ways of playing and all the swings that MSG has added. every class, Druid aside, can cause really huge swings and like at their whim. Like that, if you draft a deck that has any kind of flavor at all, you will have these big swings and that wrecks mid range. So I mean, I think what Shady's style here, in terms of like not drafting 4s and 5s, does is it gets rid of that trap, that mid range trap, where you're taking these cards that don't give you these extra things, trying to play Curvestone when Curvestone is at its worst right now in the arena. Not that it's not like viable, but that it, compared to, I think, how most people, especially if you're an arena vet, you probably have a bias towards playing Curvestone because of how arena was in the past, and like even into the mid range. And so when you're playing a control deck and you're breaking out of that, it allows you to get more value in the control. And I think what Shady's emphasizing, and what I think is also really important, is that you still need your early drops. You don't want to whiff your turn 2. You don't want to like do, ping on turn 3. You want that 1, 2, and 3 still. And the place where you can like kind of pull back a little, where you can say like, oh, it doesn't really matter if I curve or not, I'll just hero power and pass, or hero power and play a utility card at turns like 4 and 5. And I think that's like a way of playing that most people, the vast majority of people, don't even try to touch. They value the 4 and the 5s very heavily because that's traditionally, that was a very good plan.
Yeah, it's just how people have been taught to draft. If something is missing from your curve, fill the slot.
Yep.
Like, oh, I know. I see this all the time when I see people draft, and it's not really wrong, right? Like, you don't want to have a super imbalanced deck, but if you have enough 2s to play 2 2s on 4 or a 2 and a ping, and same on 5, you can play a 3 and a 2.
Yep.
And then make up for that extra card you lost by drawing later on. That's just as good as dropping the Pit Fighter. But, the Pit Fighter can be in your opening hand, make it less likely that you curve out, and again, make it more likely going to lose against aggro or midrange. And against value, like Pit Fighter it's above average, right? But let's say Yetis or something, they really don't do that much. Like they come down, even against Flame Strikes later on, they just get Flame Strike pinged. Or I guess against Priest, it's a little bit more of a hassle, a Yeti, but it's a pretty specific example.
Right.
If you want, I can go over the playstyle a little bit more so people know, because that's drafting a deck is one thing, right? But I feel like it's always, whenever I do this, people then emulate the draft style, but then play how they would normally would, and then still go like, oh man, this Shady guy doesn't know anything. This sucks.
I didn't curve out on 4 and I lost because of it. So before we get into the playstyle, I want to confirm like how many 2-drops is a bare minimum for this kind of style, and how many do you actually like want in an ideal deck scenario? Like actual 2-drops, 3 2s and 2 3s.
I group 1s and 2s for this purpose because I feel like it's fairly similar.
Right. You drop a 1, then you hero power is the equivalent of a 2.
Yeah, exactly. So I usually want 7 to 10 1s and 2s, something around that range. For 3s, I want 3 to 4, and then it gets a little bit messy after that. Because for 4s, you can say 0 to 3 because you'll still be okay having 2 Shredders and Water Ellie, because those things.
So I just want to point out that Shady's not kidding when he's talking about 1s and like really curving out. In a traditional Mage deck that most people like try to draft, it's like 5 or 6 2-drops, and you're like happy. You're like, oh, I'm gonna curve out way more often than not. I'm good. This is 7 to 10, which is typically like, you hear that when I'm talking about like, oh, I'm drafting a warrior. I want 7 to 10 1 and 2-drops, or like it's a warlock. I want to be a little aggressive. That's what I want. You don't usually hear people talking about Mage like that, or you haven't since like Classic and Nax, when Mage was actually able to go aggro with fireballs.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. This is what, and it came to me that I needed to explain this when someone in my stream said, you're not playing control. Look at your 1s and 2s. Right. You're an aggro deck. I'm like, no. I have Arcane Intellects. I have Acolyte of Pain. I have Conjure. I have Echo. Like, this is as control as it gets. But people just look at the curve and say, oh, 1s and 2s. This is an aggro deck. Absolutely. And I'm just, no, this is absolutely not. This is just my defense against aggro.
Exactly. You have like 2 or 3 extra small cards rather than middle range cards. Each of them losing about, let's say, 2 mana's worth of value. But your plan in your deck is to more than make up for it with more high value cards later on. Because if you have an Arcane Intellect, that's not just a normal card, that's 2 normal cards, which is a lot more than like dropping a 4-drop down to a 2 if you're just counting card advantage. So if adding an extra 2-drop over a 4-drop allows you to play that Arcane Intellect into your deck, then you've actually gained value in the deck overall, even though now you're running 7 to 10 2-drops and it looks a little weird.
Yep, indeed. It's really one of those styles where you have to look at the deck as a whole. You can't just look at card quality in general. A lot of people draft that way, and it's very important that you can see what you need and then draft for that. Otherwise, it can be disastrous if you start taking, for instance, Arcane Intellects over Flame Strikes, but then you don't respect the style, and you're there like, I have intellects. Like, why is it not working? And then you have actually 5 early game cards. Yeah, you get rushed down and those intellects.
Start milling yourself in desperation.
And then that Flame Strike would have been really nice, of course. So, all right.
So let's go on to playstyle.
Yeah.
How do you play in order to make this actually a control deck and not an aggro deck that is missing its curve?
Really important, and this is probably the most important skill in Hearthstone, is identifying what you're up against. That's the core of Arena. So if you are playing against a deck that is more aggressive than you, like say you are the defender, which is going to happen quite a bit. Usually my way for identifying that is if the class is not a mage or a priest, you are probably going to be defending. If it is a priest, you are probably going to be a little bit more on the offense. You can't lose board. You need to play a little bit faster and more proactive. If it's a mage, it's really, see what he does, right? Is he playing a little bit more greedy than you? Is he giving you moments to grab the board? Is he comfortable falling behind? Is he trying to bait you into Flame Strike? So that's the first thing. Identify what you're up against. If you're up against a deck that's more aggressive, an aggro or mid-range deck, then you just play purely for tempo. I see this so many times where people draft a greedy mage deck like this and then say, oh, but I need value, right? It's like, no, the value is in your deck. You play 100% for tempo. Just slam the cards on the board. It doesn't matter if you have like 1 or 2 cards less than him. Your deck will make up for that. Yep. He will be drawing into 2s, 4s, 3s. You'll get Arcane Intellect, Acolyte, Conjure, all these things. So don't get greedy. Don't hero power if you don't have to. Play the 2, even if he's going to ping it, play the 2, just, make sure you don't fall behind on board.
That needs to be super emphasized. And I think that's one of like the playstyle differences in Mage in this meta between me and Merps that I keep like trying to tell him not to do. And I'm glad I have some backup on this now when it comes to Mage specifically, which is when it comes to like choices you make on turn 5 or turn 6, there's usually a slightly higher value, slightly lower tempo play, and a slightly higher tempo, slightly lower value play. And usually for Mage, if you're playing a true control style, you want the value because you're trying to get the value because you're always afraid, unless you're facing aggro, you're always afraid that you're not actually going to be able to value out in the end because your opponent's getting all the good trades on the board, right? Like, so you actually have to do that. But if you're in this meta, especially if you have a deck that has a lot of like high value stuff, you just need to get all the tempo possible out on the board in the early going. And then you can figure out your value later because your deck will carry you there. That's the whole point of drafting in any way that emphasizes value.
No, I mean, I completely agree. I don't think we have that much of a difference because I totally agree with what Shady says in that if your deck has value, right? Like even if you don't have it in your hand, if your deck has value, you're going to draw into it eventually. Like I think that is a really good point and like sort of the takeaway point if there is one. Like just trust in your deck. You don't need to panic even if you don't have the Firelands portals in your hand or if you don't have like, the big Bog Creeper in your hand just yet. It'll get there eventually. Or if it doesn't, then you never win in the first place. So.
Yep, exactly. Like that's just variance, right? Sometimes you will not draw, a card from your top 15. Sometimes that'll happen. It's very unlikely, right? But it's just like sometimes your opponent will have Blizzard into Flame Strike, Flame Strike. Doesn't mean you'll play around Blizzard into Flame Strike every time. Yep. Then obviously the second part, right? We have established now what we do against a more aggressive deck. What do we do against the deck where we are not really sure whether they are rushing us down, where it's really not apparent that they are making a move, so to speak? That means that we will do all those things we just talked about. We will play that Gnomish Inventor on turn 4 over double 2-drop. We will use that hero power instead of tempoing out to 2-3 to pick up their 2-1 because it's a very different experience when you're playing that game. If you are playing in the mirror, the value mirror, or rather the control mirror, it is unlikely that the control player, your opponent, well, you're both control players, but that your opponent is suddenly going to make a huge flip to the board, punish you, and start going aggressive and having tons of burn. So what you want to do, and this is hard to explain, like you just want to be slightly behind them. Always like never pushing the board too much, like giving them a way to use their AoE, giving them a way to get that swing. You always want to just, it's almost like bleeding them out, very controlled. Don't give them a way to swing the board. Don't give them a way to get super big value. Don't give them a way to use any of those things. And you can only do this if you have, say, a polymorph ready to go. Because if you play a little bit more reactive like that, and they slam a Kvaldi Raider, and you can't deal with it, then obviously you're going to die. So make sure that you have something ready to go. If you don't have that, you'll have to play a little bit more minions. But usually the big thing in the control mirror is who gets to use their AoE. Because those cards are usually dead cards. But if you can bait your opponent into playing too fast, use an AoE for value, you've used a quote-unquote dead card in the matchup to great effect. So you don't want to give that to your opponent. So in the value mirrors, it's very important to not give your opponent a great AoE turn. And you just want to, just be slightly slower than them, get more cards here and there. I'm sure we've all experienced this, right? We are playing a deck and we're being aggressive, but we know we're not going to get there. And then you know we're going to run out of cards, and it's just a really weird feeling. But we want to give that to our opponents. We just want to be a little bit slower than them. Let them, give them the idea that they're aggressive.
Wants to give his opponents a really weird feeling.
Yeah, full cut, right. Cool. No, but that's why I said it's weird to say that. But if you'll play the game, you'll understand, right? You just want to make sure that they lose cards at a steady pace, a little bit faster than you.
Yeah, and I it's the feeling where because I've been playing like some arenas today, and like I was on the receiving end, I was also on the giving end of this. When you're ahead on the board and they drop like a Noyatron and like they drop a Noyatron and
you don't even have to finish that thought. I'm already like, oh.
I know you're already like, oh god. But what's the name of that 4-mana 2/3 taunt? Is that thing called? Infested Torrent. Wait, did you say Tentacle?
Oh no, that's 2/4.
Yeah, it's a 3-drop.
Yeah, no.
No. Anyways, but yeah, like when you drop both of those and you're just like, oh god, like it's such a bad feeling because you keep your entire board, but you don't get any damage onto them, and they're like, this is great for a setup.
Yeah,
and you're just,
set up that like 2 damage board clear on everything.
Yeah, it's such a painful feeling, and Shady, I think that's sort of what you're getting at, right? It's like if you put those two things down, like you're still behind, but you can confidently put that down if you have, if you have the cards in your deck that allow you to get behind a little bit and maybe stay behind, and then you go for that first push. Because in these control versus control matchups, it's also just like in the Warlock versus Warlock control matchup, like whoever gets the first decent Abyssal usually wins, right? Yeah, because after the first Abyssal lands, there's not usually a good a great Abyssal field after that. So it's whoever gets the first good Abyssal usually wins that matchup.
And this is typical in control mirrors. It's doing something with very little investment that makes your opponent react. So if we can get a small AoE to go off, for instance, first, and then we get to play 1 or 2 of our small dudes, or maybe one of our bigger guys, and we can start pressuring them and say, I know you don't want to polymorph this thing, but if you don't, it's going to keep hitting you in the face. It's those kind of things, right? If you can just put them in a position where they have to spend cards they'd rather not on a lower quality threats, then the bigger card comes out. And we can do that by constantly playing things like Cabal Courier, Gnomish Inventor, Conjurer. Conjurer is a great example, right? If you can make them fireball a Conjurer because it's hitting them in the face for 6, that's great. But you can usually only achieve that by not going all out in the early game and letting them land a good AoE on you.
Yeah, and like remember, when you're playing things like Gnomish Inventors, like those cards, like they're not even using a card. You don't care.
Absolutely.
Like, so what? They eat it, right? They eat it. Did they gain a card? No, they didn't, because you're just stalling. You're just stalling because you're playing control against a control deck.
Yeah, Shady, I can definitely see in your style of Mage, like Ethereal Conjurer, like, well, first of all, Ethereal Conjurer is just an amazing card, but for your style, Ethereal Conjurer is just like, I mean, that's ridiculous, right? You get to drop the body, you get to discover a spell, which is always good for offensive or defensive purposes, right? So it has that flexibility, it has the value, and you're just dropping something that you are able to even protect because you drafted the early game, right? So they don't get to always, trade their 3-2 into your 6-3, because if you have early game, you're going to be able to protect and wipe out, their other small drops. So you can drop it into something, into one of their mid-range minions, or you can maybe even drop in an empty board and it's just like, deal with it. It's 6 attack and I've gotten value out of it already.
Yeah, it really comes back to what you're playing against. If you're playing against the value, the Conjure will come out a lot sooner than when you are playing against an aggressive deck. Because once again, if you're playing against more aggressive decks, Conjure is technically not a great tempo play.
Yeah.
Especially if they can't kill it on the board. Maybe if they can kill on the board, it's bad. But you also have to keep in mind, like if it's an aggressive shaman, you might just lightning bolt that thing or fire elemental it, and you've lost 5 mana worth of investment. So it's usually something we only want to play if we're desperate and we're looking for that Blizzard or that Flame Strike to come back on the board. Otherwise, it usually comes out pretty much like when we really need an answer or when the deal has already been made, when the deal is sealed.
I think that's a great point. It's like you have to see who your opponents are. So let me ask you, like, what classes would you categorize as the more aggressive classes right now? Because I think this is something that we probably all agree with, but it would be good for the listeners.
Yeah. Okay. So the classes I'm happy to see is everything except Mage, Warlock, and Priest. Everything else I'm very happy to meet. I have a very high win rate against. Warlock is okay. Mage usually is okay as well, because I draft greedier than most mages. So it's just like when you meet that insane mage deck. Priest is just my lowest win rate. I hate playing as Priest because they get so much value out of nothing, especially if you can't, dominate them in the early game. They just start healing their stuff, nothing dies.
I mean, that's because that's the counter to your deck, because you're conceding to them that mid-range game, and then they're on the board and they're a Priest. So once they get on the board, you're not getting them off the board.
Right.
So if Priest gets immensely popular, I might have to abandon this. But for now, it's very nice.
I think you're safe there. I think they buff Priest as much as they're going to.
No joke. Most of my runs look like this. Like 6, 7, or 8 or 9 wins or whatever, and then like 2 losses to Priest and some random bullshit loss. It's usually 2 losses to Priest. I kid you not. It's always the same.
Yeah. And look, whatever style you draft against, you're always going to be weak against some other archetype, right? So it's not too surprising. And if you're going to be weak to any sort of archetype or any class, might as well be a not that popular one. If you're weak to like Control Warlock,
Enforcer,
do not play. Like, do not draft any deck. And you look at it, it's like, oh man, I don't think this would do so great against Warlocks. I wonder how well this would do generally.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's the art of card games, right? Just study the field and pick stuff that's good against most.
Yeah, like if you draft a deck and it's an overall pretty good deck, but it's weak against Abyssal Enforcers, you can still get like 7 wins out of it. You're just not going 12. That's just never going to happen. But if you draft a deck that's like, oh, I'm weak against Priest, you can go 12. That'll happen. Like you will not see 3 Priests on most of your runs.
So for a little bit of a context, by the way, because people might be hearing this and say, yeah, sure, he's trying out some stuff, but is it really that good? My January overall average, which is tons of experimentation and stuff and playing all the classes, was 738 over 76 runs. Out of that, my Mage carried super hard with over 14 runs, 8.78.
Nice.
With this
Very nice.
Yeah. So it's really consistent. I say after getting 1 win with it today, but that was crazy. I had Priests and Druids with MCT destroyed. It was really bad.
We don't need you to relive this, man. It's okay.
Yeah,
this is a safe place.
Victor was there, so we could support each other. It was bad.
It's like, I'm not sucking. Am I right? No, dude, you're fine. You're not sucking. Okay, good. I just want to make sure.
It's not your fault. It's not your fault.
Overall, it was really consistent.
All right. So that's Shady's, we'll call it the anti-mid-range mage, not because it defeats mid-range, but because there's no mid-range cards in the thing, which is pretty unique for like any class to draft like that. But it seems like it works really well. I've drafted not intentionally, but it just so happens sometimes you don't get 4 drops and 5 drops. Similar decks, and it's also worked out. It's worked out well. So it's definitely something to try, and more important than that, it's something to like. This is whenever we learn about a specific deck that does well in the meta, it's not just like, hey, go play this deck. It's also, oh, now hopefully I know some things about the meta in general. And so I can apply these kinds of principles and why this deck is successful and why things that should make it weak aren't making it weak. And it's like areas in which it's edging out, I don't know, the edge are so important. And I can apply that to other classes as well. Not like in a don't draft 4 or 5 drops way, but in my draft here, maybe it's okay to have these weaknesses if I have these strengths to overcome it. So I think it's like a very useful discussion to have overall. And the fact that it's mage is really helpful because you see a lot of mages and you're probably going to draft a lot of mages still. It's still, no matter who you talk to, it's like somewhere in the top 3 classes still. Okay, let's move on to question from the GOAT. Question from the GOAT is brought to you by our patrons. Thank you guys so much for our top patrons. Our patrons are at patreon.com/grinninggoat. This is how we keep the lights on here at the Lightforge, and we have been really delinquent at giving shoutouts. But a huge shout out to 4P, Natasha, Afro Ninja TB, Talon Dragon, Famous Wild Goat, Ingo, and Ugbog. Thank you guys so much for supporting the GOAT. And so, what is today's question from the GOAT, Merps?
All right. So recently, there's been a leak. There's always been a leak. I think Blizzard does this intentionally. It's like, ho, accidentally release some info. But there's been a leak, and we.
This is the weirdest leak too. Like, you know how it came out, right?
It was a voice actress.
It was a voice actress who put it on her like resume or something, like what character she voiced for Blizzard, and this was on it for an unreleased product. Like, that doesn't happen.
Yeah, but the name of the the next expansion has come out. It is Lost Secrets of Ungoro, however you pronounce it.
It's Ungoro. I know that's the wrong pronunciation, but it's Ungoro.
Well, UN apostrophe Goro.
That does not make Goro into Goro or whatever you're trying to pronounce it as.
Anyways, Lost Secrets of Ungoro, and there will be dinosaurs, I'm guessing. I don't know much about, Warcraft lore in general, but Shady, do you know anything about this? Did you ever play?
Yeah, for sure. What they're referring to, Ungoro Crater is a zone in World of Warcraft. Basically, just I guess it's kind of fitting. It's meteorite hit. It's a crater, and it's lots of dinosaurs in there. You have to do questing and stuff.
Wait, so the
meteorite
hit, and there's a crater, and the meteorite brought dinosaurs to the land of Azeroth.
I assume there was a meteorite hit. Otherwise, it could just be a different crater. But
it's just a random crater. Have all the dinosaurs.
Maybe the dinosaurs excavated, a crater because they feel more at home or whatever. But it was a crater, and there was dinosaurs in there. Yeah, that's how it happens.
Excellent.
That makes sense. I mean, Bloodfriend Raptor was always a card, so we knew there were dinosaurs in World of Warcraft.
Now it's just gonna be power creep, like 2 mana, 4/2. It's like Bloodfenner Raptor or something. I don't know. But the question from the GOAT is basically, with news of a new expansion coming out, what do you guys want to see in terms of mechanics, in terms of sort of class changes? Like, what do you guys want to see along with this next expansion?
So the next expansion is probably like the way Blizzard like a year ago announced that they were going to do large expansion, like in a cycle. It goes large expansion, adventure, and then another large expansion. And so that means the next one should be a large expansion because it's the first one of the year. So it should follow the same pattern as 2016, rather than the previous pattern of large expansion, adventure, large expansion, adventure, etc. So it should be like a pretty big set if they stick to their word about it. And so they could do a lot of things. A large expansion usually has like 3 defined, like one really big overarching theme, and then like 2 smaller kinds of things, right? The only reason that Old Gods was such a disappointment for the arena was because the Gods themes don't really apply to the arena because they're all legendary cards. So all Arena got was like extra taunts and like forbidden cards. But they could do a lot of things. I think one of the obvious ones that they could do is just to make a new tribe. I don't know. Maybe I'm getting a little normal with these existing tribes. So maybe dinosaurs could be their own tribe.
I mean, it could be. To my knowledge, the pattern is just usually big expansion adventure, big expansion adventure.
Yep, that's the pattern so far. But they announced early last year that they're going to stop that, and they're going to instead do like yearly cycles. This is when Standard came in, like along with Old Gods.
Yeah, switch it up because of that. Okay. Cool.
Yeah, so they're going to do big expansion, adventure, big expansion every year, starting with big expansion.
Good stuff. Yeah, the main thing I want to see, and it will not be a surprise, is I want reach for hunters. I want to have a real hunter experience again in the arena, rather than let's just draft some minions and hope it works out. Which is unlikely if they're making the dinosaur theme, right? It feels like they're going to be pushing that a little bit more, that more minion-based style. But I really, really enjoyed, back in LoE. Even though Hunter was bad in LoE, you could play some really funky stuff with Cobra shots and Nightblade and explosive traps and stuff. And that stuff's all getting more diluted, and they're just printing less and less reach, which is probably because of Constructed. They want to keep that. Well, you'd say they want to keep that a little cleaner, and then they make like patches and stuff. But yeah, it's a whole different.
Patches is a minion, so we're all good there.
It's a minion, yeah. It's cool. That's fun and interactive. Yeah.
Well, it's like you say that, and they keep on giving shamans early game weapons, right? Which are like early game weapons are by far the strongest thing in Hearthstone, period, because it has its initiative and value in one package,
and
right?
it's also like an early drop on top of that.
Yes, you can drop. It's a non-conditional, like if they don't have anything, fine, I'll just save up this weapon. It'll always be good. It'll always be there. So weapons by themselves are really good, and early game weapons are just sort of the best things in Hearthstone that you can possibly get.
Yeah, and even late game weapons in Hunter are so good. Like Piranha Launcher, we talked about this card so much because we rated it so high, and we stick by it. Like, it seems like a crappy card, but in Arena, just that reach and that extra beast, it's just so insane when you layer it on top of the Hunter.
Yeah.
And that's what it is. Yeah, like, that's what Cobra Shot is, right? Like, those are the cards that you miss. That's what Nightblade is. You want these cards in Hunter that are crap if you just look at it, right? You're paying way too much mana.
Your hero power does the 2 damage.
Yeah, exactly. It looks so bad if you don't take into account the fact that your hero power amplifies any direct face damage you deal. So yeah. I'm with you. I want Hunter to go in that direction a little bit again. It's really fallen very far away from that direction.
And I think Hunter is the class that is due, right? You look at sort of historically what classes have been at the bottom of the arena meta.
Druid is due.
Druid, well, you could say that they were like quite good for quite some time. They were tier 2 for the longest time, right? Like you could always say they were tier 2 for the longest time. I think if you sort of average out like the rankings of the classes from like meta to meta, right? Expansion to expansion or whatever, Hunter is the one that it kind of is due now. Like ever since they haven't gotten weapons and they've become more minion based, like the dev team throws them a bone every expansion or two by giving them like a pretty decent 1-drop, right? Like a Fiery Bat, an Alley Cat, definitely good cards, but they don't follow it up with a card that really enhances their win rate. Like they haven't gotten their Cabal Talon Priest yet, right? Like just the card that you look at and you're like, okay, win the game on turn 3. So. Not saying they should print something like that, because I don't enjoy number one beating or getting beat by Cabal Talon Priest on turn 3. But in terms of power cards, yes, I think Hunter is due for some sort of power card.
Yeah, you guys were talking about Druid and how it's always been like tier 2. I remember in the Grand Tournament, Druid for me was like absolute tier 1, almost like unopposed. It was so strong with the Darnassus
Aspirant every deck.
Yeah. Living Roots as well, yeah. It was really good.
Oh, that was good. That was good. Yeah. We have come a long way since then. Now for Druid, I have to rely on my naturalizes. And that's when That's when you know that your class has like hit a certain skill ceiling, like, and goodness ceiling, that you're totally fine taking naturalizes and you're looking forward to it.
Yeah, I just built face decks with Druid. Well, that shouldn't surprise many people.
Yes.
I just built face decks with Druid, and I get like 5, 6,
It's
7
good.
sometimes.
People don't.
Sometimes you get high quality deck and it works, but yeah.
Yeah, people don't think of Druid as kind of a face class, but you have that hero power. What are the hero powers that deal damage to opponent's face? It's Hunter, Mage, Rogue, Druid. The other ones can all go fairly aggressive. Why not Druid?
Yep.
Okay. I do wonder what the huge new mechanic is. I hope they're going to give us one, because MSG had 2 big mechanics. One is Jade, and one is hand buffs. And the hand buffs one was so fun to like not only play with but play against. Right? It created the solitaire paladin that I'm actually a huge fan of. People don't like playing against.
Wait, Shady, what is your opinion on this? I hate. Okay, look, I respect the fact that, Smuggler's Run and Grime Street Smuggler, especially, Smuggler's Run and Grime Street Outfitter. Those 2 cards I want. Like, last week, ADWCTA and I had a discussion about it. I was like, I hate it. I hate it because...
like, hey, playing against it.
Yes, because it makes the Powder on the other side. It's like me playing Solitaire. It's me, like, facing an AI boss battle.
Yes, exactly. That's not Solitaire.
I hate that. Like, it's not about what the paladin will do to my board or whatever. I'm just like, okay, I gotta brace myself for like, overstated minions. Like, do I have responses to this? I hate that kind of play style or facing up against it. It's very frustrating.
I usually just say those hand buffs take fun and interactive to a whole new level. Like,
fun and interactive with your mind. With your mind.
We go from a point where people complain like, oh, he's just throwing stuff out of his hand onto my board. Now it's like he's just throwing stuff from his hand onto his hand and then putting it on the board, and I can't even interact. Like, there's no like, unless you're gonna dirty rat him or whatever. There's no way to interact with the hand. So it's really frustrating when they are playing that solitaire game of like, ooh, smuggler shot every turn. This is really cool. Oh, double gangster 5/5, nice. This is going well. And you're just sitting on the other end like, I've literally not been able to play. The best remedy I found is you just play extremely greedy, put everything on 1, and just say like, no consecrate, no consecrate, no consecrate. Yeah, that's
or you ramp. I figured out ramping is a really good counter, because like ramping is the better version of hand buffing, because you get more turns in which you get bigger things out. And but like the problem is ramp is not very good against other decks. Besides hand buffs.
That requires you to play ramp druid, which loses against a lot of stuff.
Just finding the bright side of druid here. Okay, so we're going to get a big mechanic, and it's going to be a bigger mechanic than like hunters have more reach, or like we have dinosaurs as its own class now rather than Bloodframe Raptor being a beast, which is like, and they can go anywhere with it, and I'm really curious what they do with it. I hope it's not like OG, where they're like, oh, it's all tied to a certain legendary card that you're not going to have in the arena. But yeah, I'm looking forward to it. Okay, let's move on. Card Good Bad. Card Good Bad. This was really great, because we forgot that we were going to do this week, and so we asked Shady what he wanted to do for Card Good Bad, and he like literally said this exact same thing. So we're doing Cabal Courier, Grime Street Informant, and Lotus Agents, which are the 3 tri-class rare cards that draw you a card from one of the other tri-classes. And they are all very, very good. They're all better than Yetis on the tier list. Cabal Courier is 59, Grime Street Informant 62, Lotus Agents is 58, and they serve similar functions in your deck. So why are they really good, I guess, is the question. Or are they really good? Does like Shady, do you think they're not really good?
Yeah, so the one I have a lot of experience with, because I've been testing this mage so intensively, is Cabal Courier, and I picked that card. I can't remember the last time I've skipped one. It's really I've just snapped it over a blizzard. It's just like, yep, get in my deck. Like, for my style, it's exceptional.
Do you take it over a polymorph?
Well, it's a rare, but yeah.
Right.
I haven't had to make that decision yet. I'll probably pick Polymorph, because that's probably one of the best things I'd be looking for from a courier. But yeah, I'll pick it over an AoE early on, absolutely. But Polymorph is like my 2 12-0s, one at 4 couriers, the other at 3 polymorphs. So like, it really shows like those are cards I really like. But yeah, I mean the Cabal Courier. But it's weird. You'd have to rate it a lot higher in Mage than you'd have to rate it in Priest or Warlock, because Mage is so dependent on getting that extra card. And in Warlock, I'd rate it fairly low because you have your hero power and you just want board and play Abyssals essentially. This 3-mana 2/2 is just in the way.
Yeah.
Cabal Courier and Warlock is a 53 rather than a 59, so it's like barely above average.
So do you have thoughts about the other two, like the Informant and the Lotus Agents, in terms of like, do you like them as much, less, more?
So it all depends, once again, what deck you are building. In the aggressive rogues I've been building, I've been really liking the Lotus Agents. They're great to find small reach. Or, that turn 7, the opponent just dropped the bog, you're like, come on, sap. Or, indulge even if it's turn 8, and then you land it, you feel so good, and you get that hard removal. So if I'm playing an aggressive deck, I'm all over the Lotus Agents. If you're, well, that's the thing, right? If you're playing a value deck with Lotus Agents, I feel like it's not really Lotus Agents' fault, but you shouldn't be playing a value deck in those classes.
Yes.
And I feel for that reason, it feels like it's bad, because you're just going up against classes that are better at doing the value thing. But if we're playing aggressive decks, I really like Lotus Agents. Grindstone Informant, I'm going to be honest with, I haven't had enough experience with. I mean, I've pulled a Brawl and it was amazing. I've pulled a Tiri and it was amazing. But yeah, other than that, I haven't really been playing the Goons as much this expansion.
Yeah.
I think for Lotus Agents, the one class that you can play slow in, because, I mean, Rogue you can, and I do sometimes, but it's like definitely not the preferred style. Druid you almost can't in this meta. But for Shaman, you can definitely still play slow. They still have those big minions. Sure, they all cost 4 mana, but they're all really, really big still. So you can play into the late game.
I agree. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, but there's a lot of them, right? You got like one of the new Shaman commons that offers Jade is like a big card. You have your 7/7. You have your Fire Guard Destroyers. You have your Fire Elemental still. Like there's plenty of your hexes. There's plenty of cards there to make a big thing. And you can utilize your totems later on as well. So I think Shaman late game still works, and so Lotus Agents, I really like Lotus Agents for Shaman in a late game style. The other two, it's a little harder to make late game decks, but again, like you said, right, that's not Lotus Agents' fault. It's more like you just shouldn't be making those kinds of decks, and if you get cornered into making that deck, fine. But Lotus Agents does its job. It's also why it's the lowest rated of the three. On our tier list, but it's still good. It's still something that, just the fact that you can discover an answer, and they're all class cards, and class cards are generally good. Like, you can answer your situation.
Absolutely.
And it's why, like, Ethereal Conjurer is so good, right? Like, you discover an answer. It's also why we don't rate, like, Tomb Spider insanely high, because beasts are not typically going to be good answers.
Yeah, Tomb Spider is not versatile, as in it'll give you an extra card and something good in the moment. It'll just give you an extra card, and it's not even guaranteed that great, right?
Yeah. So, any more thoughts, Merps, on why these cards are good?
So I guess I'll add about Grime Street Informant, right? Like that's the one that Shady hasn't played a lot of, and I will not be playing a lot of, but I did play a lot of it, like in so far in the month.
You mean when you're tryharding, you don't take warriors and hunters all the time?
Crazy, right? But part of the reason why it's such a good card is, first of all, you are look at what you're searching for, and look at the classes that you're searching within, and sort of the limitation within these classes as well. These are classes which have powerful cards, but are usually inflexible. Right. So you're searching for a card which naturally gives you flexibility. And like these are classes in which they have either really powerful cards or like really good weapons. Right?
Yeah. You're almost always searching for a weapon, I feel like, whenever I'm playing Grime Street Informant.
Yes. So the reason this card is so freaking good, I love it when I play those classes. And please do not play it if you're tryharding. Like or
it's
take
the
this
class's
card,
fault. It's not the Grime Street Informant's fault.
But
he's doing his best.
Decent chance of getting a really high tier score card. Yeah.
Like, look at our tier scores, because you know how Discover works. It doesn't take into account rarity or anything like that.
Yep.
It just looks at cards. And just, like, you know, go to Classic View Value in the Lightforge.com tier list and just click through. What are the classes with the top cards, the most number of top cards? It's literally Hunter, Paladin, Warrior. And I know you don't think about it when you think of Hunter. Like, you know Paladins have all these amazing cards. You know Warriors they've given ridiculous cards to. But no one thinks about the Hunter. They do. They're just all epics and rares. Like, none of them are common, which is why you don't think about it, right? Like, Glaizuka aside, like, they're not common. But you have your Steam Weedle Snipers, your High Mains, your Gladiators Longbows, Explosive Shots, Piranha Launcher, Eagle Horn Bow, Call of the Wild, right? Like, these cards exist and they're in Hunter. So you just have this, like, really large pool of great cards that you can pull from Grand Street Informant, like more so than Cabal Courier and Lotus Agents by the percentage.
Yeah, and like I said, the inflexibility of these classes means that that's how Blizzard makes up for it, right? Like, if non-pink classes, they deserve sort of more powerful cards because you're going to overkill with your weapons. You know, there would be times where that 5-1 on the board, you're just like, oh god, I have to throw a 4-4 onto the board to combat this 5-1. But when you search for cards, you're going to search for a pretty freaking good answer if you want initiative, or you're just going to get a really good tier score card because these classes are really good.
Yeah, and again, like what Shady said, if you're making an aggressive deck, which I feel like most of these decks are kind of, like, most of the goons are pretty aggressive in MSG. If only because hand buffs are not terribly great value, like Paladins especially, right? Like, you're going to run out of steam because they have to buff. Like, that's the way the whole thing's set up. You will run out of steam in, like, the late mid-game. That's why the Grand Street Informant is so low costing, and that's why the Grand Street Informant can get you reach. And especially if you're a hunter or something, getting that reach is so important. And it solves problems to let your cards on the board get reach, and it also can just directly get you reach itself. So that's our highest rated one of the bunch, actually. More so because of what it can do rather than like a sheer like a 1/1 is so good for 2 mana. No. Okay, so that's when it comes to, like, I think the important part, and we'll just hammer it home again, is you use these cards to solve problems. A lot of people want to play them on curve. Every time I have one of these cards in my hand, chat always, like, anytime I can play it reasonably, they'll say, play it. Because, I don't know, maybe they like to see the Discover and it's a fun card. But that's not the right way to play these cards. The right way to play these cards is wait till you have a problem. Like, as long as you're not screwing up your curve beforehand, wait till you have a problem and then play it. Or, like, wait till you have recognized your opponent's deck archetype at least, and then play it. Because then that'll allow you to pick the correct card. And this is the same for all Discover cards, but again, you're not going to find answers with Tomb Spider, right? These cards are designed for you to find answers for. They are like Ethereal Conjurer. You play them if you have to, if your other combinations of cards are like bad or like subpar, or you can just get away with it here and draw cards for no penalty. But otherwise, don't anti-tempo yourself to find something when you don't need an answer. Like, wait till you know what you're looking for.
It's really twofold, right? Because on one hand you are detempoing yourself, like you say, but it came when Raven Idol was printed. So many people, every time you didn't cast Raven Idol 1, were like, hey, wait, why you missed the mana thing, streamer dude, why didn't you play the thing that was green? Was it because if I get a swipe or a nourish now, I don't know which one I'm gonna pick?
Yep.
If I play this on turn 9 and I'm out of cards, I'll pick the nourish. If I play it on turn 5 and I really need a swipe, I'll pick the swipe. So it's huge deal.
Yep.
Okay, so that's why they're good, and like Shady said, right? Like, I was seeing if you wanted it over a polymorph just to see how good it is, because there are also people who think these cards are like super premium cards. You know, like Cult Master, polymorph, like Hex level good. They're not quite that good. They're still just a card draw. You know, Discover's good, but it's still RNG.
The thing is that polymorph for me is just really high rated, but there's very little rares I'll pick over this thing, just because there are a lot of good cards in those. There's a lot of good cards for what we want in those classes, right? Just pure more stuff, right?
Okay, Argent Commander / Bomb Lobber or a Cabal Courier.
Oh, Courier. In
really?
the
okay.
In the Mage style, right?
In the Mage style, okay. In the Mage style.
Yeah, absolutely. just because it's guaranteed more stuff, right? Whereas the Argent or the Bomb Lover can be awkward in the value mirrors, whereas Cabal Courier I can always play.
It's only a little bit more value than the Argent Commander.
True, but
one mana
it allows you to develop without investing.
That's true, yeah.
And
it's much more flexible to play whenever you kind of want to.
Yeah, you've been in that situation where you're in the value mirror and like, do I Argent him in the face or do I pass or do I? Yeah. Whereas you say, hey, let's play the courier. Let's put some. This is exactly what I said, right? Forcing a reaction by playing no card essentially. So that's why it's really good. Because I mean, in the aggro and mid range, you don't need it. You know, except for maybe finding a light bomb to save yourself. But value wise, you don't need it. It really shines in the value mirrors.
Yeah. I think that's a good point because if you guys have noticed in control versus control matchups, sometimes it really is like turn 10, the other person, like one person plays a 3/3 and pings face, right? The other person is like, oh man, it's like, all right, well, I'll drop this 4/2 and then ping the 3/3. And it's like you have all of these like polymorphs, your flame lances in your hand, you don't want to use them. And then like you have these cards that will not respond well in the control matchup, and then you as the control player always fear it's like, nah, damn, maybe my hand just isn't as good then, because like if they just draw something in which like I can't respond to, and I give them these 4 extra turns to like get something that I can't respond to, then I just lose, right? So it's pretty painful, and just having stuff to play out there that doesn't that doesn't sort of commit you to anything. It's quite good.
All right, let's move on to our final topic of the day. Wrap this up with Class Talk Hunter. We have not done a coup in 2 weeks, and so it's gonna be good to get back in the swing of things. And with Hunter, which is a very fun class, and Hunter has gotten a lot of attention in MSG since I think like sometime in January. Crip made a video, and whenever Crip makes a video, everybody knows about it. So he made a video that basically said Hunter was like one of the best classes, if not the best class in the meta at the time. And that caused a huge commotion because Crip was like very well known before that to like literally never play Hunter. Like he hates Hunter. He's played 1 Hunter run on stream in the last like 2 years before that. It was like some ridiculous stat. And so here he is coming out and then saying like, oh, Hunter's so good in this meta. And Crip, as we know now, with the leaderboard, #1 record in January on one of his other accounts, I think. So that got a huge commotion because I don't think anyone else really bought that Hunter was really #1 or anywhere close to it. So what do we think about the Hunter? Full disclosure, on our class tier list, it is in that middle jumbo along with like pretty much everyone, like all the other classes that's not Mage, Warlock, Rogue, which are higher, or Warrior, which is lower. It's in that middle jumbo of like classes.
For me, Hunter was good. I think that's correct. Maybe not that it was the best class, like people said, Crip said, but it was strong because people were really, getting used to this Warlock thing. Like, oh, everyone's saying Warlock's so good, let me pick it. Oh, 7 Abyssals and Forces, that's really good. And then, it's obviously not 7, but, like people are drafting 2 Fellfires, way too high of a curve. They get all this new flashy stuff. I'm like, yeah, Warlock. And then there's this Hunter who just goes like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, hit you in the face. And they're like, wow, what happened?
I can't play Abyssal on 7. I would be dead if I did that. How did that happen? Indeed.
And then slowly, gradually, Warlocks are like, oh, life is important. So what if I just still draft the Abyssals and the Blast Crystals, but ditch all the rest and just grab Curve? And now that you don't have that automatic free win against Warlocks, if you meet a Paladin who just goes Smuggler's Run on 1 and starts curving, it's terrible. You have a Priest who has a Potion of Madness. Like, I feel like right now there's not enough incentive and way too many punishes for picking Hunter. So I think on average, you'll do fairly bad with, it pains me to say because I love Hunter, but I think on average you'll do fairly bad with Hunter right now because you don't have that free roll train of Warlocks that are learning how to play in this meta.
Yeah, I think there was definitely a point last month where because the leaderboards were just announced, right? And then some people were like, oh man, I want to play a little bit more serious, right? And this gets them excited, or they just come back and they play Warlock, right? They're like, okay, what's number one? Like, we know statistically Warlock has the highest win rate. Warlock is good. Everyone says Warlock is good. I'm going to play Warlock, but they don't have that experience yet. So what did they know at that point? Abyssal Enforcer is good. Blast Crystal Potion is good. It's like, oh man, Void Caller with like Fearsome Doomguard, Void Caller with all these big demons. That's so good. And they just get absolutely wrecked by Hunters.
Void Caller is such a trap. Because it makes you take these stupid big demons that don't actually work if you don't have a Void Caller.
You might be able to call out that Fearsome Doomguard to see your face explode on the next turn. Like that, maybe. So it's one of those situations where that sort of meta where everyone basically flock to Warlock and maybe not like drafted appropriately. Like they'll win every single control matchup, right? Like against the pure control decks, but they'll just lose against every single hunter as well. That's gone now, and hunters know they prioritize picking stuff like, you know, Malkazar's Imps 1/3 on turn 1. That's great. You know, that's great anti-aggro tech, right? Yeah. And it's also a demon, so if you get a demon fire, you can get a 3/5 on turn 2. Just stuff like, you know, draft your Malkazar's Imps, draft your small stuff, draft your like Fen Creepers. Like I see Warlocks doing that a lot more now, which is kind of, it's just definitely pretty annoying because it shores up one of their previous weaknesses or how people drafted them. And they're tougher to beat than ever now.
So you look at the other Grimy Goons class, like the Warrior, well actually not necessarily. Like for the Warrior, I think Grimy Goons slowed him down a little too. The Paladin is sped up, but for the Hunter, the Grimy Goons definitely slowed him down. Because you got the Zip Gunner, which is this incredibly amazing card, and it's undercurved. And it gives you something for later that you play. So now you're like really making your push in the mid game. So those like super fast hunters really didn't get all that much support in this expansion. And I think where that comes through most clearly is when you look at your Priest matchup. Priest was always this weird thing for Hunter, where normally Hunters do really crappy if you can heal yourself, right? Like they do really bad against Warriors. That's one of like the shining beacons that Warriors can look forward to even before they got all the good cards. That's like, okay, I'm facing a Hunter, I'm good.
Right.
But they were always okay against Priest. You know, they're actually favored against Priest. And it's because they just went so fast that the Priest can't afford to heal its face and be able to like do clears and things like that. Because the Priest's big clears are usually like very expensive. So now the matchup has totally flipped because Priests have Potion of Madness and Hunters are more mid-range, which plays right into like when Priest can establish control and like reestablish. So now Hunters have an insanely bad matchup against Priest. Kind of like the same way that they have a bad matchup against Warrior. And that really hurts.
It's like turn 1 Fire Bat, turn 2 Grandma, hover the concede button, go.
No, that's the problem, right?
Ready to slam it if you see the card come up.
Like I always have to pick Kindly Grandmother, but then when I'm facing Priest, I'm like, oh god, this is terrible. Yeah. Or you play your Hunt's Creeper because it's so premium as a 2-drop, and then you're just like, oh please no, like don't take my Spider.
Right the answer is always yes whenever you get like 3 wins and you face a Priest. The answer is always yes. They always have a freaking Potion of Madness. So that's why Hunter's in a pretty bad place, I think. It's on the bottom of that middle zone, and it's always lacked consistency. The way you get consistency with Hunter is just to take a lot of like 1-drops and go super aggro, but you can't do that anymore to great effect. So you have to play mid-range, and then like now the Hunter's consistency or lack thereof in like being able to curve out as well as the other classes just by offering odds starts showing through. And you're being pulled in so many different directions that you don't have the tools for it in the class. You need to play mid-range, but you need to be fast enough to be able to go under the point in which a control deck can control you still. But you're not fast enough to be able to control the board against a true aggro deck, so you still have to like have mid-range to reestablish the board. Like if you are facing against an aggro deck, you're put in this really awkward position. And you still have a good matchup against Warlock. No matter what the Warlock does, you will always have a good matchup against the Warlock. But it's no longer an auto win. And against Mages, you're screwed more
if they
so.
have like certain cards.
Yeah,
Yeah.
potion hurts really hard.
Yeah, like they got more tools to deal with it, and they're pushed into archetypes now that deal with it with hunters well. Because hunters were always good against mages, because you're flame strike proof, right? You've dealt your damage before the flame strike. Well, now you're a mid-range hunter. You have not dealt your damage before the flame strike comes in. Flame strike comes in, you're screwed. So now you got to play like this mid-range game where you have to be a little bigger to survive the flame strike. But that's what makes you even more vulnerable to like priests and other control. Like you're being pulled in too many directions with your deck building, and it doesn't quite. I think Zip Gunner is still an insane card, and that's one of the only saving graces for the hunter right now, because it allows you to build that mid-range deck without totally sacrificing your aggressive deck.
It's just in the wrong meta. It's like Zip Gunner. Why'd you have to be here? We could have had so many great moments.
Yes.
Yeah, not right. Yeah, I feel like you make a correct analysis, and I would add something in that you can play aggro, but I feel like it's really all or nothing. Mm-hmm. I think if you draft Hunter, you need to say, okay, am I gonna go for guaranteed meh and pick? Well, not guaranteed. You might get a killer mid range that can do well with it, but I feel like mid range is almost guaranteed meh, and aggro is like, okay, meet the right people, curve out, do fantastic, or meet 2 paladins and a priest and call it a day.
Right.
Like, yeah, you're very vulnerable if you go pure aggro, because that's really what it is, right? Meet 3 wrong people, you're out.
Mm-hmm.
Pretty much just rock paper scissors style that you're playing arena then. So yeah, that's how I've been approaching it. If I'm feeling lucky, if I get a couple good aggro cards, I say, okay, let's just go all in and just hope. Otherwise it's this more boring mid-rangey style, and you'll get some wins, but it won't be a 12er most of the time.
Yep. All right. Well, that's the hunter right now. So not the best class, and I think if you look at, or I don't know if Cripps actually said what classes he played for his number 1 spot, but I'm pretty sure there were no hunters in there. It's just don't buy the hype on the hunter. To whatever extent the hunter had its moment in the meta, it was brief, and it is over now, definitely. So don't get too.
I got confirmation by Victor, by the way, because some people might bring up the argument, hey, but Victor, the guy with the 9.32 average, did play Hunter. He has now also come around and said, that was just that magical time when Warlocks didn't know the draft curve and it all worked together.
You had to wait a little bit until everyone knew that Warlocks were the best. But then you can't wait too long before they figure out how to actually play Warlock.
Absolutely. Yeah, he was a big fan of Hunter back then, up to the point that he got me back into Hunter. I'm like, all right, let's do it. And then it's like, Victor, I don't know if it's working. He's like, yeah, no, I think it stopped working as well. Like, he had this like 4 or 5 run spree where he's killing everything. And now he's also come around and said, it's no longer part of my go-to classes.
Yep. All right. I think that's about it. Shady, was there anything you want to talk about that we didn't touch upon yet?
I think we talked a lot. I really enjoyed it.
That we definitely did.
Shady made a lot of promises that he's definitely going to keep.
I thought we talked enough to forget about that. So
we'll never talk enough to.
No. It was very fun, guys.
But Shady, thanks so much. So where can we get more of you if we want to see more of you?
All right. Well, I do streams 6 days a week on Twitch. That's twitch.tv/Shadybunny. I do have a YouTube channel. That's Shadybunny Live. I know the name's kind of weird, but Shadybunny was taken. So Shadybunny Live, but not that live.
Wait,
the not live, the not live version of Shadybunny is Shadybunny Live.
Shadybunny was taken on YouTube.
Oh, damn! All right. Anyway, Shady, thank you so much as always. Tons of fun, and I thought that was very extremely educational. I saw you were looking at a sheet of paper. Did you actually prep for this?
Yeah, I can show the camera, the listeners won't be able to see it, but people on the stream got a...
Oh, man. Outline. Wow. That's a lot of words, too, for outline. Nice.
But for me, it was easy because it's basically everything I always go over when I'm doing these drafts. So it's also fun to get that out of your head and put it on a piece of paper.
Yeah, definitely.
It's good to make yourself actually define it, because sometimes you have this feeling okay, is it 7, is it 8 early game drops, and then you have to go over your deck list and actually be like, no, it's actually 7 to 10. So it's pretty cool.
Yeah. All right, that's it. Thank you so much once again. I'm sure it was very entertaining and educational for all the listeners out there. Let's sign off. Oh, I'm going first this time. This is Merps.
This is ADWCTA.
This is Shady. See you guys.
I'll see you guys.
Bye.